The mark on Violet Newbury's apartment door was invisible to human eyes, but every vampire in the city would see at the moment they turned down her hallway a crimson sigil that translated simply to blood offering. She had no idea it was there as she fumbled with her keys that Thursday evening, exhausted from her double shift at the hospital where she worked as a trauma nurse. The late autumn rain had soaked through her jacket, and all she wanted was a hot shower and whatever leftovers were still edible in her refrigerator. Her building in downtown Boston was old, with high ceilings and crown molding that reminded her of better days, though the neighborhood had grown rougher in recent years. Still, the rent was manageable on her salary, and she'd grown attached to the place despite its quirks. The lock finally gave way, and she pushed inside, dropping her bag by the door and kicking off her wet shoes. Her small studio apartment was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains, casting everything in shades of gray and amber. She flipped the light switch and began peeling off her damp clothes, leaving a trail to the bathroom. Steam filled the tiny space as she stood under the hot water, letting it ease the tension from her shoulders. 12-hour shifts were brutal, especially when they ran into each other like today. 3 car accident victims, 2 stabbings, and a child with a mysterious illness that had stumped even the senior doctors. She'd held the mother's hand while they ran tests, promising everything would be fine even though she had no right to make such promises. That was the hardest part of her job, the lying. The necessary, compassionate lying that gave people hope, even when hope was a fool's currency. She dried off and pulled on an oversized sweater and leggings, then padded to her kitchen to investigate the refrigerator situation. A container of pad thai that was probably 2 days past its prime, some wilted lettuce, and half a bottle of white wine. She grabbed the wine in a glass, settling onto her worn couch with her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother in Connecticut. She'd call back tomorrow. A text from her coworker Sarah asking if she wanted to grab drinks this weekend. Maybe. And a notification from her building's management about increased security patrols in the area after several residents reported feeling watched at night. Violet took a long sip of wine and pulled her blanket over her lap. The radiator clanked and hissed, struggling against the autumn chill. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, a constant symphony in this part of the city. She'd grown so accustomed to the sound that silence would have felt more unsettling. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that at that very moment, 3 vampires were converging on her building. They'd seen the mark, caught the scent of what they believed was sanctioned prey, and were eager to feed. The mark bore the seal of Constantine, the Vampire King's oldest and most dangerous enemy, and no vampire in their right mind would ignore such an invitation. But there was another vampire moving through the Boston night, one whose reaction to that mark was very different. Vasilios Draven stood on the rooftop across from Violet's building, his pale hands clenched into fists at his sides, his white hair whipped in the wind, long enough to brush his shoulders, and his ancient eyes so dark they appeared black in certain light, were fixed on the glowing crimson sigil that defaced her door. Even from this distance he could read it perfectly, could sense the malevolent intent behind it. Constantine had marked an innocent for death. Again. Vasilios had been tracking his enemy's movements for 300 years, ever since the night Constantine had slaughtered Vasilios's blood family and burned their estate to the ground. They'd been rivals since before that, philosophical opposites in an immortal war over how vampires should exist in the modern world. Vasilios believed in the old codes, in discretion and honor, and the careful balance that kept their kind hidden from human awareness. Constantine believed in domination, in terrorizing humans into submission, in ruling openly and brutally. The mark on this girl's door was a challenge. Constantine was in Boston, likely watching from somewhere nearby, waiting to see if Vasilios would interfere. Because Constantine knew somehow he always knew exactly which buttons to push, which lines to cross to draw Vasilios into a confrontation. The smart move would be to let it go, to recognize the trap for what it was and walk away. One human life against centuries of careful strategy, against the larger war they'd been fighting across continents in decades. But Vasilios had never been particularly good at making the smart move where innocents were concerned. He leapt from the rooftop, his body moving with preternatural grace as he descended 6 stories and landed silently in the alley below. His long black coat settled around him like wings as he straightened, and he moved toward the building's entrance with predatory purpose. The rain didn't touch him. He controlled his environment so completely that drops simply evaporated before reaching his skin, leaving a faint shimmer of steam in his wake. The building's front door was locked, but such things were meaningless to him. He placed his palm against the metal and felt the mechanism inside respond to his will, tumblers falling into place with quiet clicks. The lobby was empty, its outdated decor and flickering fluorescent lights speaking to decades of deferred maintenance. He could smell mold in the walls, cooking odors from a dozen different apartments, and beneath it all, blood. Human blood, pumping through veins, calling to the predator in him with its warmth and vitality. He'd fed 3 days ago, so the hunger was manageable. Barely a whisper at the back of his consciousness, but he knew the 3 vampires approaching the building wouldn't be so well controlled. Constantine chose his instruments carefully, selecting the young and reckless, those who'd barely mastered their bloodlust. They'd tear the girl apart. Vasilios took the stairs 3 at a time, moving faster now. He reached the 4th floor and stopped, his senses extending outward like invisible threads. The mark pulsed with dark energy, and behind the door it defaced. He could hear a single heartbeat. Slow, steady, relaxed. She had no idea death was coming for her. He approached the door and examined the mark more closely. Constantine's personal seal, drawn in vampire blood mixed with ash from consecrated ground, a mockery of the old rituals. It would remain visible to vampire eyes for exactly 24 hours, which meant it had been placed recently, within the last few hours, which meant Constantine was definitely still in the city. Vasilios reached out and pressed his palm against the mark, feeling it burn against his skin like ice and fire simultaneously. Dark magic, the kind that required sacrifice and intention, the kind that most vampires had abandoned centuries ago as too dangerous, too revealing. But Constantine had never cared about the risks. He reveled in them. With a focused effort of will, Vasilios began to unravel the spell. It resisted, clinging to the door like a living thing, but he was older than Constantine by nearly 2 centuries and considerably more powerful. The mark flickered, dimmed, and finally dissolved into nothing, leaving only a faint scorch mark on the painted wood that human eyes might dismiss as water damage or age. But it was too late. The 3 vampires had already seen it, were already on their way. He could feel them in the building now, ascending through the stairwell with hungry purpose. Young ones, like he'd suspected, probably not even a century old between them. Dangerous in their enthusiasm but lacking the control and cunning of elder vampires. He could kill them. It would be easy, even 3 against 1. But killing carried consequences in vampire society, required justifications and trials before the council. And more importantly, it would reveal his presence in Boston to every vampire in the city, which would complicate the larger hunt for Constantine. The door behind him opened. Vasilios turned, and for the first time in 300 years of existence, found himself genuinely surprised. The woman standing in the doorway was small, barely reaching his shoulder, with dark curly hair pulled into a messy knot and eyes the color of honey in lamplight. She wore an oversized sweater that hung off one shoulder and leggings with a hole in one knee, and she looked at him with a mixture of confusion and wariness that was entirely justified, given that he was a strange man standing in her hallway at 9 o'clock at night. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the obvious concern in her expression. Her hand remained on the door handle, ready to slam it shut, and he could see her phone clutched in her other hand. Smart girl. "You need to leave," Vasilios said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Right now. Don't pack anything. Don't ask questions. Just leave this building and don't come back until morning." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not going anywhere. Who are you? How did you get into this building?" He could hear the 3 vampires getting closer. 2 floors below now, moving fast. He was running out of time, and this stubborn human was arguing with him about identification. "My name is irrelevant. You're in danger, and I'm trying to save your life. Please." The word felt foreign on his tongue. He couldn't remember the last time he'd said please to anyone. "Trust me. Leave now." "Are you insane? I'm calling the police." She started to close the door, and Vasilios did the only thing he could think of. He moved with vampire speed, pushing into her apartment before she could react and shut the door behind him. Violet stumbled backward, her heart rate spiking so fast he could hear it like thunder. Get out! Get out right now or I swear—" "They're coming," he interrupted, positioning himself between her and the door. "3 of them. They'll be here in less than a minute, and when they arrive, they will kill you. I'm sorry for frightening you, but I cannot explain in a way that you'll believe. You'll have to trust that I'm the lesser danger." She grabbed a knife from her kitchen counter, a small thing, barely useful against a human attacker and completely pointless against vampires, but he appreciated her courage. Her hands shook as she pointed it at him, but her voice remained remarkably steady. "I said get out. I can't do that." The words hung in the air between them, and something shifted in her expression. She was looking at him more carefully now, taking in details she'd missed in her initial panic. His unusual appearance, the white hair, the too pale skin, the eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The way he stood with unnatural stillness, not even breathing. The otherworldly beauty that all vampires possessed, evolution's trick to lure prey closer. "What are you?" The question was barely a whisper. Before he could answer, the door exploded inward. Vasilios moved on instinct, grabbing Violet and pulling her behind him as 3 figures poured into the apartment. They were young vampires, like he'd expected: a tall male with blood-red eyes and fangs already extended, a female with platinum hair and black veins visible beneath her skin, and another male whose face had already begun to contort into the monstrous aspect that vampires could assume when feeding. All 3 wore modern clothes jeans, leather jackets, designer sneakers, but their eyes held the ancient hunger that defined their kind. "Back away," Vasilios commanded, his voice dropping into the register that carried compulsion. "This human is under my protection." The tall male laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She bore Constantine's mark. She's free prey, sanctioned by—" "The mark is gone," Vasilios interrupted. "I removed it. She is mine now, and you will leave." The female vampire tilted her head, studying him with predatory interest. "You're old, ancient even, but there are 3 of us, Elder, and we're very hungry. Constantine's mark or not, we've already caught her scent, already imagined how she'll taste." Behind him, Violet made a small sound of terror, and something inside Vasilios went cold and dark. These foolish children thought they could threaten what was his. His? When had he started thinking of her as his? It didn't matter. What mattered was getting them out of her apartment before they forced his hand. "I am Vasilios Draven," he said quietly, "and I have lived for 500 years. I have ended bloodlines and toppled vampire courts. I have walked through fire and survived the ancient purges. You are children playing at being monsters, and if you do not leave this instant, I will show you what a real monster looks like." The name registered. He saw recognition dawn in their eyes, followed by fear. Good. His reputation still carried weight, even among the young ones who thought themselves invincible. The female vampire grabbed the arms of her companions. "We should go. We can't—" "But the girl," the monstrous one protested, his voice thick with bloodlust. "I can hear her heart, smell her fear, just a taste." Vasilios moved. One moment he was standing in front of Violet. The next he had the young vampire by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. The creature struggled, clawing at Vasilios's arm, but it was like trying to break free from stone. "Her name," Vasilios said softly, "is not the girl. She is a person, with thoughts and dreams and people who love her. She is not food. She is not prey. And if you ever come near her again, I will remove your head from your body and leave it in the sun. Do you understand?" The vampire managed a strangled nod, and Vasilios released him. All 3 of them scrambled for the door, vampire grace abandoned in their panic. They disappeared into the hallway, and Vasilios listened to their footsteps retreating down the stairs and out of the building, not stopping until they were several blocks away. Only then did he turn to face the human he'd just claimed. Violet was pressed against her kitchen counter, the knife still clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with shock. She was breathing fast, on the edge of hyperventilating, and he could see her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. "You're a vampire," she said flatly. "They were vampires. Vampires are real." "Yes. And they were going to kill me." "Yes. Because someone named Constantine marked my door. Yes. She laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. This is insane. I'm going insane. I hit my head at work and I'm actually unconscious in a hospital bed right now, having the world's most vivid nightmare. Vasilios took a careful step toward her. You're not dreaming. I wish you were. This would be simpler if you were. Don't come closer. She raised the knife again and he stopped immediately. I won't hurt you. I give you my word. The word of a vampire. That's super comforting, thank you. Despite everything, he almost smiled. She had spirit, this small human with her honey-colored eyes and her makeshift weapon. Most people would have fainted by now or dissolved into sobbing panic, but she was facing down her terror with sarcasm and stubbornness, and something about that called to him in a way he couldn't quite name. My word is worth something, whether you believe it or not, he said. I follow the old codes, honor, protection, discretion. I don't kill innocents, and I don't feed from the unwilling. How progressive of you. You want a medal? I want you to understand that you're safe with me. Safe, right, because I definitely feel safe right now. He could hear her heart still racing, could smell the adrenaline flooding her system. She was holding herself together through sheer force of will, but she was close to breaking. He needed to give her something solid to hold on to, some piece of information that would make this nightmare feel manageable. My name is Vasilios Draven, he said again, softer this time. I am, as you observed, a vampire. I've been tracking another vampire named Constantine for the past 300 years. He's my enemy, and he marked your door as a way to draw me into a confrontation. He knew I would come to protect you. Why? She lowered the knife slightly. Why would he know that? Why would you care about protecting some random human? It was a fair question, and one he didn't have a good answer for. Because Constantine knows me, knows that I can't ignore innocents in danger, that I follow the old codes even when it's tactically foolish. He uses human lives as bait, and I take the bait. So I'm what? Collateral damage in some ancient vampire grudge match? Not anymore. The words came out with more intensity than he'd intended. I've removed the mark. You're under my protection now, which means every vampire in this city will know you're off limits. You're safe. She laughed again. That same slightly unhinged sound. I'm safe, sure. Except that vampires are real, and one of them wants me dead, and another one is standing in my apartment telling me everything is fine. This is fine. Everything is totally fine. She was spiraling. He could see it happening, see her mind trying to bend around impossible information and starting to fracture under the strain. He needed to ground her, give her something practical to focus on. What's your name? He asked. The question seemed to surprise her. What? Your name. I should know it if I'm going to protect you. Violet. The answer came automatically. Violet Newbury. Violet. He tested the name, found he liked the shape of it. That's lovely. Now, Violet, I need you to breathe, slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that for me? I'm a trauma nurse. I know how to breathe. Then do it. She glared at him but obeyed, taking several deep, deliberate breaths. He watched the color return to her face, watched her heartbeat gradually slow from panic speed to merely elevated. Good. She was tougher than he'd given her credit for. Better? He asked. Not really. But I'm not going to pass out, if that's what you're worried about. It was, actually. She set the knife down on the counter, though he noticed she kept it within easy reach. So what happens now? Do you erase my memory? Isn't that what vampires do in the movies? Some vampires can compel humans to forget, yes, but I won't do that to you. You deserve to know the truth of what you're dealing with. How magnanimous. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture. And what exactly am I dealing with? You said I'm under your protection. What does that mean? It means I've claimed you as mine. In vampire society, that's an unbreakable declaration. No other vampire can harm you without answering to me. Claimed me? Like I'm property? He winced at the way she said it. Poor choice of words. Protected, not owned. You're still free to live your life as you choose. I'm simply ensuring that no vampire threatens that life. For how long? As long as necessary. And what's the catch? Nobody does something for nothing, especially not... She gestured vaguely at him. 500-year-old vampires with grudges. He should have expected the cynicism. She'd be a fool to trust him at face value, and she clearly wasn't a fool. There's no catch. I don't want anything from you. Except my blood, presumably. I fed 3 days ago. I won't need to feed again for another week at least, and when I do, it won't be from you. I have arrangements with willing donors. She absorbed this information with visible discomfort. This is so deeply weird. I don't know how to process any of this. I know. I'm sorry. They stood in silence for a moment, the destroyed doorframe between them a reminder of how quickly her normal life had been shattered. Vasilios could see her trying to think through the logistics, could practically hear the questions forming in her mind. My door's broken, she said finally. I'll have it fixed. And those vampires know where I live. They won't come back? They know you're mine now. She flinched at the possessive phrase, and he made a mental note to be more careful with his language. Modern humans had different sensibilities than those he'd grown accustomed to in previous centuries. I can't stay here, she said. Even if they don't come back, that Constantine person knows where I live. He could send more vampires, or come himself. She was right, of course. The apartment was compromised. Do you have somewhere else you can go? Family? Friends? My mom lives in Connecticut, but I can't. She stopped, shaking her head. I can't bring this to her. I can't put her in danger. Then you'll stay with me. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. He hadn't planned to make the offer, hadn't even consciously thought it through. But the moment he said it, he knew it was the right choice, the only choice. Stay with you, she repeated slowly. The vampire. I have a secure residence, multiple defenses, both physical and magical. Constantine won't be able to reach you there. This is insane. Yes. I don't even know you. I know, but right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a very painful death, so I'm asking you to trust me, just for tonight. Tomorrow in daylight we can make other arrangements if you prefer, but tonight you can't stay here. He watched her wrestle with the decision, saw the moment she arrived at the same conclusion he had. She didn't really have a choice, not if she wanted to survive. Fine, she said finally, but I'm bringing the knife. He almost smiled again. Fair enough. She grabbed a backpack from her closet and started throwing things into it, clothes, toiletries, her phone charger, a worn paperback book. He watched her move around the small apartment, memorizing the space. The framed photos on the shelf, Violet with an older woman who must be her mother, Violet in scrubs with co-workers, Violet laughing on a beach somewhere warm. The plants on the windowsill, somehow thriving despite the limited light. The stack of medical journals on the coffee table. The violin case in the corner, dusty enough to suggest it hadn't been opened in months. She was real to him in a way most humans weren't. Not just a heartbeat and a potential meal, but a person with a life and interests and complexities. It was dangerous, he realized. Dangerous to see her as anything other than a responsibility. A civilian casualty in his war with Constantine. But the realization came too late. He already cared in the small ways that would grow into larger ones if he wasn't careful. Ready, she announced, shouldering her backpack. She'd changed into jeans and boots, practical choices. She'd also put on a jacket and tucked the knife into her belt, where she could reach it quickly. We'll take the fire escape, he said. I don't want to risk running into any more vampires in the stairwell. You think there might be more? Better to be cautious. He led her to her window, pushing it open onto the metal platform outside. The rain had stopped, leaving everything wet and gleaming under the streetlights. Violet climbed out after him, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow when she nearly slipped on the slick metal. I've got it, she said, pulling away from his touch. They descended in silence, 4 floors of narrow ladder and precarious platforms. She moved carefully, testing each step, while he could have simply leaped to the ground. But he stayed with her, matching her pace, ready to catch her if she fell. When they reached the alley, he scanned the shadows for threats. The 3 young vampires were long gone, but he could sense others in the city, moving through the night on their own business. Boston had a sizable vampire population, drawn by the old architecture and the abundant food supply of a major city. Most of them followed the council's rules about discretion and consent, but there were always rogues, always those who thought themselves above the law. Stay close to me, he instructed, and Violet nodded. His residence was only a few blocks away, in a converted church that had been abandoned in the 1970s and subsequently purchased by a series of shell companies he controlled. From the outside, it still looked abandoned, with boarded windows and crumbling stonework. But inside, it was a fortress, protected by wards and technology that would keep out any vampire who wasn't explicitly invited. They walked through streets that grew progressively quieter, leaving behind the noise of her neighborhood for the desolate commercial district where his church stood. Violet kept looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, her hand hovering near the knife at her belt. "We're not being followed," he assured her. "How can you tell?" "I can sense other vampires within a certain radius. Right now the nearest one is 12 blocks away, heading in the opposite direction." "Handy. It has its uses." The church loomed ahead, its Gothic spire reaching into the cloudy night sky. He placed his palm against the heavy wooden door, and Violet heard a series of locks disengaging with metallic clicks. The door swung open, revealing darkness beyond. "After you," he said, and she hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. He followed, and the door closed behind them, locks re-engaging automatically. With a gesture, he brought up the light's modern LED fixtures hidden in the antique sconces, bright enough to illuminate the space, but calibrated to a warmer tone that didn't hurt his vampire eyes. Violet turned in a slow circle, taking in her surroundings. The church's main sanctuary had been converted into a living space that blended old and new. The original pews were gone, replaced by modern furniture in dark leather and wood. The stained glass windows remained, though they had been reinforced with steel and covered from the outside to maintain the building's abandoned appearance. Bookshelves lined every available wall, filled with volumes in dozens of languages. A fireplace had been added to one wall, currently unlit. The vaulted ceiling soared overhead, still decorated with its original wooden beams and faded murals. "This is where you live?" she asked. "One of several properties I maintain, yes, but this is my primary residence. It's very," she seemed to search for a polite word, "Gothic. I'm a 500-year-old vampire. Did you expect minimalist Scandinavian design?" To his surprise, she laughed, a real laugh this time, not the half-hysterical sound from earlier. "Fair point. Are those books all yours?" "I've collected them over the years. Many are quite rare." She moved closer to the nearest shelf, reading titles. "Medical texts? Why do you have medical texts?" "I find human medicine fascinating. The way your kind has learned to extend life, to fight off diseases that would have been death sentences in previous centuries. It's remarkable, really." She glanced back at him, and there was something new in her expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of curiosity. "You said you don't kill innocents. What do you do? How do you survive?" "I told you I have arrangements. There are humans who know about vampires and willingly provide blood in exchange for money or protection or other considerations. It's a transaction, mutually beneficial." "So you just, what, sip from them politely and send them on their way?" "Essentially, yes. Though sip is perhaps not the right verb. We need about a pint to feel satisfied, which is roughly the same amount donated during a blood drive. As long as the human is healthy and we don't feed too frequently, there's no lasting harm." She processed this, visibly trying to reconcile the monster from horror movies with the reality standing in front of her. "And the sunlight thing. That's real?" "Very real. Sunlight burns vampire flesh on contact. Young vampires can combust entirely within seconds. Older vampires like myself can survive a bit longer, but it's extraordinarily painful and ultimately fatal." "So you're basically nocturnal?" "By necessity, yes." "And you sleep in a coffin?" "No, I sleep in a bed like a civilized person. The coffin myth is absurd." Another small laugh. She was relaxing, incrementally, the adrenaline fading from her system. He could see exhaustion replacing it, the crash after the panic. She swayed slightly on her feet, and he moved toward her instinctively. "You should rest," he said. "There's a guest room upstairs in what used to be the choir loft. It's private and secure." "Where will you be?" "Downstairs. I'll keep watch." She hesitated. "You don't sleep?" "I do, but not until dawn. I'll be alert all night." "That's actually kind of reassuring, in a weird way." He led her up a spiral staircase to the second level, where he'd converted several small rooms into functional living spaces. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a double bed, a dresser, and a small bathroom. The window had been bricked over from the inside, both for security and to allow him to use the space during daylight hours if needed. "I know it's not much," he said. "It's fine. Better than fine, considering the alternative was being vampire dinner." She set her backpack on the bed, then turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing this? And don't give me that line about following codes. There has to be more to it than that." He met her eyes, those honey-colored eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "I don't know," he admitted. "Ask me again tomorrow, and perhaps I'll have a better answer." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, tomorrow?" He left her then, closing the door and descending the stairs to give her privacy. He could hear her moving around the room, the sound of water running as she used the bathroom, the creak of bed springs as she lay down. Her heartbeat gradually slowed, and within 20 minutes he could tell from her breathing that she'd fallen asleep. He settled into one of the leather chairs and tried to focus on the larger problem. Constantine was in Boston, playing his games, using humans as pawns. The mark on Violet's door hadn't been random. Nothing Constantine did was random. He must have been watching Vasilios, tracking his movements, looking for a vulnerability to exploit. But why Violet specifically? What had drawn Constantine's attention to one unremarkable human woman in a city of hundreds of thousands? Unless she wasn't unremarkable. Unless there was something about her that Constantine had sensed, something that made her a more valuable target. Vasilios stood and began to pace, turning the problem over in his mind. He needed more information about Violet Newbury, her background, her connections, anything that might explain Constantine's interest. But he'd have to wait until she woke to ask, and pressing too hard might frighten her away. The night passed slowly. He read for a while, forcing his way through a dense philosophical text that failed to hold his attention. He checked his security systems, scanning the magical wards that protected the building and the physical cameras that monitored the surrounding streets. Nothing unusual. Constantine knew better than to attack directly. He preferred subtlety, manipulation, using others to do his dirty work. Around 4 in the morning, he heard Violet cry out in her sleep. A nightmare, undoubtedly. He stood at the base of the stairs, debating whether to check on her, but she quieted after a moment, and her breathing returned to the steady rhythm of sleep. Dawn approached. He could feel it in his bones, the instinctive warning that all vampires carried. As the sky began to lighten, a wave of exhaustion hit him, his body's response to daylight, even though no actual sunlight could reach him in his protected sanctuary. He climbed the stairs to his own room, sealed and secured with blackout curtains and reinforced walls, and lay down on his bed without bothering to undress. Sleep took him immediately, the deep, death-like sleep of vampires during daylight hours. No dreams, no awareness, just a blank void until sunset. When he woke, the first thing he became aware of was the smell of coffee. He sat up, momentarily disoriented. Coffee meant Violet was awake and moving around his home, helping herself to his kitchen. The thought made him smile despite himself. Most humans in her position would have barricaded themselves in the guest room or fled entirely while the vampire slept. But she was making coffee. He changed clothes quickly, opting for dark jeans and a black sweater, and descended the stairs to find her sitting at his kitchen counter with a steaming mug, her phone in her other hand. She'd showered, he could smell his soap on her skin, and changed into fresh clothes from her backpack. Her hair was still damp, curling around her face. "Good morning," he said, and she jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. "Jesus, you move quietly." "Occupational hazard. I hope you don't mind I help myself to your coffee maker, and your coffee, and basically your entire kitchen." "Not at all. I don't actually drink coffee myself, but I keep it for... Well, I'm not sure why I keep it, actually. Habit, I suppose." "From when you did drink coffee, before you were a vampire?" "Yes." She took a sip, studying him over the rim of her mug. In daylight, or what passed for daylight, filtered through his covered windows, he could see details he'd missed the night before. The faint scar on her left eyebrow. The small constellation of freckles across her nose. The way her hands were steady and capable, hands that had undoubtedly saved lives. "I called in sick to work," she said. "Told them I had a stomach bug." They weren't happy we're understaffed as it is, but I obviously can't go in after. She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. I'm sorry. I know this has disrupted your life. Disrupted is one word for it. She set down her mug. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about this Constantine person targeting me specifically. That doesn't make sense, does it? I'm nobody. I'm just a nurse. I don't have connections or money or anything that would make me interesting to some ancient vampire with a grudge. I've been thinking about that as well. And I don't have answers yet. But I intend to find them. Tell me about yourself, Violet, your family, your history, anything that might be relevant. She shrugged. There's not much to tell. I grew up in Connecticut, went to nursing school in New York, moved to Boston 3 years ago for a job at Mass General. My dad died when I was 16, heart attack. My mom remarried a few years later. I have a half-brother who's 12 now. I work too much, don't date enough. And my biggest vice is spending too much money on books I never have time to read. I'm boring. You're not boring. You've known me less than 24 hours. And in that time, you faced down vampires with nothing but a kitchen knife and sarcasm, slept in a stranger's home without barricading the door, and made yourself coffee in said stranger's kitchen like it's the most natural thing in the world. You're either remarkably adaptable or completely insane. Maybe both? He found himself smiling again, a sensation that felt strange after so many years of practiced neutrality. Perhaps, but there must be something about you that caught Constantine's attention, some connection, some significance. Unless he just picked my door randomly. You said he was trying to draw you out. Maybe I was just convenient. It was possible, but Vasilios's instincts said otherwise. Constantine was meticulous, calculated. Everything he did served a purpose. Has anything unusual happened to you recently? He asked. Strange encounters? People paying too much attention to you? Anything that felt off? She started to shake her head, then paused. Actually, there was something weird about 2 weeks ago. I was leaving the hospital after a night shift, and there was this man watching me from across the street. Tall, really pale, wearing this old-fashioned coat. He didn't do anything, just stood there staring. It creeped me out, but I figured he was just some random weirdo. Boston has plenty of those. Vasilios felt ice form in his chest. Describe him more specifically. What did he look like? White hair, kind of long, really pale skin, like yours, and his eyes were strange, almost silver, like mirrors. He smiled at me, and I remember thinking his teeth looked too white, too perfect. Like veneers, but not quite right. Constantine. The name came out as a growl. Violet paled. That was him? He was watching me 2 weeks ago? It seems so, which means this wasn't random at all. He's been planning this. But why? What does he want from me? I don't know yet, but I will find out. She set down her coffee with shaking hands. This is insane. All of this is completely insane. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all have been some weird fever dream, but it's real. Vampires are real, and one of them has been stalking me for weeks, and I'm sitting in a converted church drinking coffee with another vampire who may or may not actually be protecting me or just playing some kind of long game I don't understand. He crossed to her, moving slowly so as not to startle her, and crouched down so they were at eye level. I understand your fear. I understand why you don't trust me. But I swear to you, on whatever honor I have left after 500 years, that I will keep you safe. Constantine will not touch you. I won't allow it. Why? The question was barely a whisper. You still haven't really answered that. Why do you care? He didn't have a good answer, not one that made logical sense at least, but looking into her eyes, seeing the fear and confusion and stubborn strength all mixed together, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades, maybe centuries, a connection, the beginning of something that could be dangerous if he let it grow. Because you deserve to live, he said finally. Because you help people, save lives, make the world better in small ways. Because innocents like you shouldn't be casualties, in wars they don't even know exist. And because he stopped, surprised by what he was about to say. Because when I look at you, I don't see prey, I see a person worth protecting." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, he glimpsed the possibility of trust. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. So what do we do now?" "Now, we learn everything we can about Constantine's plans, which means I need to make some calls, reach out to my contacts in the vampire community. Someone must have seen or heard something useful." "And me? What am I supposed to do?" "Stay here, stay safe. I know it's frustrating, but I'm not going to just hide while you play supernatural detective. I can help." "Violet, you're human. You're vulnerable in ways you can't even understand." "I'm a trauma nurse. I deal with life and death situations every single day. I know how to stay calm under pressure, how to think strategically, how to assess threats and make quick decisions. I'm not some damsel who needs to be locked in a tower." He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that vampire politics were different from hospital emergencies, that she had no idea what she was suggesting. But the determined set of her jaw told him she wouldn't back down easily. "If you help," he said carefully, "you follow my instructions without question. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. Agreed?" "Agreed." "Then we start with research. I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night when Constantine watched you. Every detail, no matter how small." They spent the next hour going over her memory of the encounter, the exact location outside the hospital's main entrance, around 6 in the morning. The way Constantine had stood perfectly still despite the morning crowds moving around him. The fact that he'd been holding something she couldn't remember what, exactly, but it had looked like paper or parchment. The way he'd smiled at her before disappearing into the crowd. Vasilios took notes, his mind working through possibilities. Constantine holding parchment suggested spell work, which was concerning. Most vampires had abandoned magic after the council banned its practice 3 centuries ago, deeming it too conspicuous and dangerous. But Constantine had never cared about council rules. "I need to go out," he said finally. "There's a vampire named Seraphine who runs an information network in the city. If anyone knows what Constantine is planning, it's her." "Can I come with you?" "No, it's too dangerous. The meeting place is in vampire territory and tensions are high right now. Your presence would complicate things." He could see her wanting to argue, but she swallowed the protest. "Fine, but you have to promise to come back and tell me everything." "I promise." He prepared to leave, arming himself with weapons both modern and ancient. Silver-edged knives deadly to vampires if the blade pierced the heart or severed the spine. A small handgun loaded with wooden bullets, crude but effective. And his own considerable power, honed over 5 centuries of surviving vampire politics and warfare. Violet watched him check his weapons with obvious unease. "Is all that really necessary?" "I hope not, but Constantine has allies, and some of them are powerful enough to be dangerous even to me." Comforting. He paused at the door, looking back at her. She seemed small in the vast space of the church, fragile and human, and unbearably precious in a way he couldn't quite articulate. The protective instinct that had driven him to save her last night had only grown stronger, settling into his chest like a physical weight. "Lock the door behind me," he instructed. "Don't let anyone in, vampire or human. The wards will keep most threats out, but if something does get through, there's a panic room behind the bookshelf in the northeast corner. Press the 3rd book on the 2nd shelf. It's a release mechanism. Inside, you'll find more weapons and a phone with emergency contacts." "You're really selling the whole, 'you're perfectly safe' thing." "I believe in being prepared. I'll be back before dawn." He left before she could respond, stepping out into the Boston night. The city hummed with life humans going about their business, unaware of the supernatural predators moving among them. He could sense several vampires nearby, feel their presence like cold spots in the warm tapestry of human life. None were close enough to be threatening, but he remained vigilant as he moved through the streets. Seraphine's establishment was in the financial district, hidden beneath an office building in a sub-basement that officially didn't exist. The entrance was through a maintenance corridor, protected by wards that would burn any vampire who hadn't been explicitly invited. Vasilios approached the door and waited, knowing Seraphine's security would have already detected his presence. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a female vampire with copper hair and eyes like chips of green glass. She was old, not quite as old as Vasilios, but ancient by most standards, and she wore modern business attire like armor, sharp suit in charcoal gray, heels that added 3 inches to her already impressive height. "Vasilios Draven," she said, her accent placing her origins somewhere in Eastern Europe. "I wondered when you'd come calling. Please, enter." He stepped inside, and she led him through a corridor lined with doors that led to private meeting rooms. The main space beyond was elegant, furnished like an upscale lounge with low lighting and expensive furniture. Several other vampires occupied the room. He recognized a few faces, members of the local court, but they paid him little attention, absorbed in their own conversations and machinations. Seraphine led him to a private room and closed the door behind them. "You're here about Constantine." "You know? I know everything that happens in my city, darling, including the fact that he marked a human for death and you claimed her as yours. Quite the scandal. The court is very interested in what you're planning." "I'm not planning anything. I'm protecting an innocent." "An innocent who somehow attracted the attention of your oldest enemy. Curious, don't you think? That's why I'm here. I need to know what Constantine is doing in Boston, what he wants with the girl." Seraphine settled into a chair and gestured for him to sit as well. "Information doesn't come free, Vasilios. You know this. Name your price. A favor, unspecified, to be called in when I have need of it." It was a dangerous bargain. Open-ended favors could be twisted into almost anything, but he didn't have much choice. "Agreed." "Excellent. Then I'll tell you what I know, which unfortunately isn't much. Constantine arrived in Boston 3 weeks ago, alone as far as we can tell. He's been careful, keeping a low profile, meeting only with a few select allies. But there have been rumors, whispers about a ritual, something that requires specific components." "What kind of ritual?" "Power transfer, perhaps, or life extension beyond normal vampire limits. The details are murky, but several vampires have reported that Constantine has been asking about humans with certain characteristics, bloodline traits, genetic markers, that sort of thing." Vasilios felt ice crystallize in his veins. He's looking for a specific human. "So it would seem. And if your little nurse matches those characteristics, then she's more than just random bait. She's a key ingredient." "For what?" "That, my dear, is the question I cannot answer. Constantine's purposes remain his own." She leaned forward, her green eyes sharp. "But I can tell you this, whatever he's planning, it involves old magic, blood magic, specifically. The kind that was banned centuries ago for good reason. Blood magic required sacrifice. Living sacrifice, human sacrifice, the kind of dark ritual that the Council had stamped out through systematic execution of anyone who practiced it. If Constantine was attempting blood magic, he was risking the wrath of every vampire authority in existence." "Where is he now?" Vasilios demanded. "That, I don't know. He's shielded himself somehow, hidden from normal detection. But he's still in the city. I can feel his presence like a wound in the fabric of things." "Who are his allies here? Who's helping him?" Seraphine hesitated, and Vasilios knew he'd hit on information she was reluctant to share. "There are 3 vampires who've been seen with him, 2 I don't know outsiders he brought with him, but the third," she sighed, "the third is Marcus Thorn." The name sent shock through Vasilios' system. Marcus Thorn had been a friend once, centuries ago, before politics and philosophy had driven them apart. He was powerful, respected, and supposedly loyal to the Council. "You're certain?" "I have witnesses who saw them meeting, multiple times. Marcus is taking a serious risk associating with Constantine, which suggests the potential reward must be significant." "Or the threat," Vasilios murmured. Constantine was infamous for coercing cooperation through blackmail and threats against loved ones. Marcus had a vampire mate, a female named Isabella. If Constantine had threatened her, I need to speak with Marcus. "I'd advise against it. If he's working with Constantine, approaching him directly would be foolish." "I'll take that risk. Where can I find him?" Seraphine gave him an address in Cambridge, a townhouse near Harvard that Marcus had owned for decades. "Be careful, Vasilios. Whatever Constantine is planning, it's big enough that he's willing to break every law we have. That makes him desperate, and desperate vampires are unpredictable." "I'm aware. Thank you, Seraphine." "Don't thank me yet. You still owe me that favor." He left her establishment and headed for Cambridge, his mind racing through possibilities. If Constantine needed Violet for a blood magic ritual, then simply hiding her wasn't enough. He needed to understand the ritual itself, find its weaknesses, and dismantle Constantine's plans before they could come to fruition. Marcus's townhouse was dark when Vasilios arrived, but he could sense life inside vampire presence, cold and ancient. He approached the door and knocked, a simple human gesture that felt oddly appropriate given the circumstances. Marcus opened the door himself, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. 300 years had passed since their last meeting, but vampires didn't change. Marcus looked exactly as Vasilios remembered: white blonde hair, aristocratic features, eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore modern clothes but carried himself with old-world formality. "Vasilios," he said finally, "I wondered if you'd find me." "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, and Vasilios entered a home that blended centuries of collected treasures with modern comfort. Art from every era decorated the walls, and books filled custom shelves that reached the ceiling. "Isabella is out," Marcus said, answering the unspoken question. "Shopping, I believe. She'll be sorry to have missed you." "I'm not here for a social call." "No, I didn't imagine you were. You're here about Constantine and the girl. Tell me what he wants with her." Marcus moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of what looked like wine but smelled like blood. He offered one to Vasilios, who shook his head. Marcus shrugged and drank deeply from his own glass before speaking. "Constantine found something. An old text, pre-council, detailing a ritual that could grant a vampire immunity to sunlight." The implications hit Vasilios like a physical blow. Immunity to sunlight would fundamentally change vampire existence, would shift the power balance between their kind and humans in ways that could be catastrophic. That's impossible. Such magic doesn't exist. It exists, or at least Constantine believes it does. The ritual requires 3 components: a vampire willing to undergo the transformation, vampire blood from at least 10 different bloodlines, and a human with specific genetic markers. Marcus paused. Markers that apparently trigger some kind of resonance with vampire blood, creating a bridge between species. And Violet has these markers. According to Constantine's research, yes, he's been searching for the right human for months, testing bloodlines across multiple cities. Your nurse is one of only 3 potential candidates he's found. What happens to the human during this ritual? Marcus looked away, unable to meet Vasilios' eyes. They don't survive. Their life force is consumed in the transformation, burned up to fuel the change. Cold rage settled over Vasilios, the kind of fury that came from centuries of existence and countless battles. And you're helping him murder an innocent for this madness. He has Isabella. The words burst from Marcus like a confession. He found out about a mistake I made, a human I killed decades ago in a moment of weakness. He threatened to expose me to the council, to have Isabella executed for covering up my crime. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Easy for you to say. You've never loved anyone enough to betray your principles. The accusation stung because it was true. Vasilios had kept himself apart from such entanglements for precisely this reason. Love made you vulnerable, gave enemies leverage against you. But standing in Marcus's home, seeing his old friend broken by the weight of his choices, Vasilios wondered if perhaps that isolation had been its own kind of mistake. "When is Constantine planning to perform the ritual?" he asked. 3 nights from now. There's a specific astronomical alignment required, something about the moon and certain stars. The ritual must be performed at midnight in a place of death. Where? The old cemetery in Brookline, the one that was closed 50 years ago after the grounds became too unstable to maintain. Constantine has been preparing the site for weeks. 3 nights. He had 3 nights to figure out how to stop this, to save Violet and end Constantine's mad plan. "Thank you for telling me," Vasilios said. "I'm sorry, old friend, for all of it. If I'd been stronger. What's done is done. Focus on protecting Isabella now. Once this is over, you'll need to answer to the council for your involvement, but I'll speak on your behalf. Tell them about the coercion. You'd do that. After I betrayed you? You were put in an impossible situation. I won't pretend to know what I'd do if faced with the same choice. He left Marcus's home and headed back toward his church, his mind already working through strategies. 3 nights wasn't much time, but it might be enough. He needed to find the other 2 potential candidates Constantine had identified, get them to safety. He needed to contact the council, inform them of Constantine's plans and location, and he needed to keep Violet protected and hidden until the threat had passed. But as he approached his church, he felt something wrong. The wards were intact, but there was a disturbance in the air, a sense of recent violence that made his protective instincts flare to life. He ran the last block and burst through the door to find his home in chaos. Furniture overturned, books scattered across the floor, and in the center of it all, Violet, standing with his kitchen knife in hand, facing down a vampire Vasilios didn't recognize. The intruder was young, barely more than a fledgling, but he was cornering Violet against the far wall, clearly intending to feed. "Get away from her," Vasilios snarled, and the young vampire turned, eyes wide with fear. "I didn't know the wards let me in, I thought. You thought wrong." Vasilios crossed the distance in an instant, grabbed the intruder by the throat, and threw him across the room with enough force to crack the stone wall. The young vampire scrambled to his feet and fled, disappearing out the door before Vasilios could stop him. He turned to Violet, who was trembling but unhurt. "Are you all right?" "Fine, I'm fine." He got in somehow, just appeared in the middle of the room. I tried to use the panic room like you said, but I couldn't find the right book, and he was so fast. She was talking too quickly, adrenaline making her words tumble over each other. "You're safe now. I'm here." She dropped the knife and crossed to him, and before he could think better of it, before he could maintain the professional distance that would be wiser, she was in his arms. He held her, feeling her heartbeat gradually slow from panic speed to something approaching normal, feeling her warmth against his cold skin. "How did he get through the wards?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. That was the question. His wards were specifically designed to keep out uninvited vampires. Unless he was invited. Someone with access to this building invited him in. Who has access besides you? No one, unless... He thought back to the young vampire's words. He said the wards let him in, which means someone altered the ward structure itself, someone powerful enough to rewrite my protections. Constantine, possibly, or one of his allies. He released her, stepping back to assess the damage. "We need to leave. This location is compromised." "Where will we go?" "I have other properties, safe houses that even my closest associates don't know about. We'll go to one of those." "Can I grab my things?" "Quickly." While she ran upstairs to collect her backpack, Vasilios moved through his home, selecting items he couldn't afford to leave behind. Certain books, documents, weapons. He worked with practiced efficiency, centuries of experience teaching him exactly what was essential during a quick evacuation. Violet returned within minutes, her backpack slung over her shoulder. "Ready?" They left through a back exit that led into an alley, and Vasilios led her through a maze of side streets toward a parking garage where he kept several vehicles. He selected a nondescript sedan, nothing flashy that would draw attention, and they drove north, out of the city proper, and into the suburbs. "Where are we going?" Violet asked. "Salem. I have a house there, small and unremarkable. No one knows about it except me." "Salem. Like witch trial Salem?" "The same. Ironic, I know, but the town has a certain protective quality. So many tourists focused on witch lore that vampire presence goes largely unnoticed." They drove in silence for a while, the city lights fading behind them. Violet stared out the window, processing everything that had happened. Vasilios could practically hear her thoughts, could sense her trying to find stable ground in a world that had become impossibly strange. "I talked to my sources," he said finally, deciding she deserved to know the truth. "I know what Constantine wants with you." He explained the ritual, the genetic markers, the plan to sacrifice her for vampire power. He watched her face pale in the dashboard light, saw her hands clench in her lap. "So I'm not just random. I'm specifically targeted because of my DNA." "Yes." "And the ritual kills the human. Me." "Yes." She took a shaky breath. Okay. So we stop him. We make sure he can't perform this ritual." "That's the plan." "How?" "I'm still working on that part." She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Great, that's super reassuring. I won't let him hurt you, Violet, I swear it. You keep saying that, but you're one vampire against how many? Constantine, plus however many allies he has, plus apparently people who can break through your magical wards like they're tissue paper. The odds aren't exactly in our favor. I've survived worse odds. Have you? Or are you just saying that to make me feel better? He glanced at her, saw the challenge in her eyes. She wanted honesty, not platitudes. There was a purge, about 200 years ago. The council decided to eliminate all vampires who refused to follow the new discretion laws. I was marked for execution because I'd been too visible, too involved in human affairs. They sent 12 vampires to kill me. I survived. How? By being smarter, faster, and more willing to do whatever was necessary, and by having something to fight for, a belief that vampires could exist alongside humans without dominating them, that we could be more than monsters. She absorbed this, then nodded. Okay, so we be smarter and faster. We figure out how to stop Constantine before he can perform this ritual. We? Yes, we. I'm not sitting on the sidelines while you play hero. This is my life we're talking about. Violet. Don't. Don't tell me it's too dangerous or that I'm just human or any of that protective garbage. I'm already in danger. The question is whether I face it as a participant or a victim. I choose participant. There was steel in her voice, a determination that reminded him why he'd been drawn to protect her in the first place. She wasn't some helpless civilian waiting to be rescued. She was a fighter, someone who'd spent years saving lives in impossible circumstances. She deserved to be treated as an equal partner, not a damsel to be locked away. All right, he agreed. We work together, but you still follow my lead when it comes to vampire matters. Fair enough. They reached Salem an hour later, and Vasilios guided the car through quiet residential streets to a small colonial-style house that looked like a dozen others on the block. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would draw attention. Perfect camouflage. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but comfortable. A living room with a couch and television, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Vasilios had purchased it decades ago as a backup location and maintained it through a property management company that asked no questions. Violet explored the space while he checked the wards and security systems. Everything was intact, undisturbed. Good. They'd be safe here, at least for a little while. There's food in the freezer, he called to her. Nothing fresh, but there should be frozen meals you can heat up. You stock human food in all your safe houses? I try to be prepared for various contingencies. She emerged from the kitchen with a frozen dinner and a slight smile. Various contingencies, is that what I am? You're an unexpected variable that requires adaptation. Wow, you really know how to make a girl feel special. He found himself smiling back, caught off guard by her ability to find humor, even in their dire circumstances. I'm out of practice with social niceties. 500 years will do that, I guess. She popped the meal in the microwave and leaned against the counter. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask, I may not answer. Fair. Have you ever been with anyone? Like, romantically, in all those centuries? The question caught him off guard. Why do you want to know? Because you're risking everything to save me, and I don't understand why. I'm trying to figure out if this is some kind of vampire savior complex or if there's something else going on. He considered deflecting, giving her a non-answer that would preserve his privacy, but she deserved honesty, especially given everything she was facing. There have been relationships, he said slowly, mostly with other vampires, a few with humans who knew what I was. Nothing that lasted. I found it difficult to maintain connections while constantly moving, constantly fighting. Eventually, I stopped trying. How long ago was eventually? About a century. A century, she repeated. 100 years alone. That's sad. It's practical. Emotions are weaknesses that enemies can exploit. Better to remain unattached. And yet here you are, attached to protecting me. He didn't have a response to that. She was right, he'd violated his own rules by caring what happened to her, by seeing her as more than just another innocent in need of protection. Somewhere between removing the mark from her door and watching her make coffee in his kitchen, She'd stopped being a responsibility and started being a person he cared about. The microwave beeped, and she retrieved her dinner, settling at the small kitchen table to eat. He watched her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion evident in every movement. She'd been through trauma, was facing an existential threat, and yet she was still functioning, still pushing forward. "You should rest," he said. "We have 3 days before the ritual. You'll need your strength." "What about you? What are you going to do?" "Plan, research, contact allies who might be willing to help." "Can I help with any of that?" "After you sleep. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." She wanted to argue he could see it in the set of her jaw, but another yawn caught her mid-protest. "Fine, but wake me up if anything important happens." "I will." She headed upstairs, and he heard the sounds of her getting ready for bed. Within half an hour, her breathing had deepened into sleep, and he was alone with his thoughts in the quiet house. He spent the night making calls, reaching out to contacts across the vampire community. Most were shocked to hear that Constantine was attempting blood magic, and several promised to bring the information before the council. But council meetings took time, required quorums and debates and formal procedures. By the time they acted, it might be too late. He needed a more immediate solution. Around dawn, as exhaustion pulled at him, he received a call from an unexpected source. Seraphine's number flashed on his phone. "I have information," she said without preamble. "About the other 2 candidates. Constantine found them." "Are they safe?" "One is dead, killed 3 nights ago in what authorities are calling a mugging gone wrong. The other is missing. Last seen 2 days ago leaving her apartment in Cambridge. No one's heard from her since." "So Violet is the only candidate left?" "It would appear so, which means Constantine will be focused entirely on acquiring her for the ritual." "He won't get her." "Vasilios, darling, I admire your determination, but you need to be realistic. Constantine has resources, allies, centuries of experience, and you're protecting a human, which limits your options significantly. Have you considered that the smart move might be to turn her?" The suggestion hit him like a physical blow. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "If she's a vampire, she's useless for the ritual. Problem solved." "Because I don't turn humans against their will, and she hasn't consented. Because becoming a vampire means giving up her humanity, her life in the sun, potentially her soul, depending on your philosophical views. I won't make that choice for her." "Even if it saves her life?" "Even then," Seraphine sighed. "You're going to get her killed, you know, and possibly yourself in the process. Then that's what happens. But I won't compromise on this." He ended the call and sat in the darkness, wrestling with the question Seraphine had raised. Was he being noble or just stubborn? Could he really protect Violet against Constantine's full resources, or was he deluding himself? Upstairs, he heard Violet stirring. Morning had arrived, and with it, another day closer to the ritual. Another day to find a solution that didn't exist. She came downstairs an hour later, showered and dressed, looking more rested than the night before. "Morning, or is it still considered night for you?" "Technically dawn, but I'm awake. I don't strictly require sleep during the day. It's more of a strong biological urge than an absolute necessity. Like humans and caffeine." Something like that. She made herself coffee. He'd stocked the kitchen before leaving last night and joined him in the living room. "So, 3 days until the ritual. What's the plan?" "We have several options. None of them good, but options nonetheless." He outlined what he'd learned: the dead candidate, the missing one, Constantine's increased urgency. Violet listened with the focused attention of someone trained to process critical information under pressure. "So he'll be coming for me soon," she said when he finished. "Probably in the next day or 2 to give himself time to prepare the ritual site." "That's my assessment. Then we use that. We let him come for me, and we set a trap." "Absolutely not. You're not bait." "I'm already bait whether we plan for it or not. At least this way we control the circumstances." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Think about it. He expects you to hide me, to keep me locked away and protected. So we do the opposite. We make it look like I've escaped, like I'm running. We pick the location, set up whatever advantages we can, and when he comes for me, we're ready. It's too dangerous. Everything is dangerous right now, but sitting here waiting for him to find us, and he will find us. You know he will. That's not a plan. That's just postponing the inevitable." He wanted to argue, wanted to shut down the idea immediately, but strategically, she was right. Constantine was older, more powerful, and had more resources. In a direct confrontation on Constantine's terms, Vasilios would likely lose. But if he could choose the battlefield, create advantages, maybe the odds would shift. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "Don't just consider it, do it. We're running out of time." They spent the rest of the day planning, working through logistics and possibilities. Violet proved to be remarkably strategic, her medical training giving her insights into vulnerabilities and contingencies that Vasilios might have overlooked. By evening, they had the skeleton of a plan that might actually work. The location would be an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront, one that Vasilios knew well from previous operations. Multiple entry points, good sight lines, and most importantly, large windows that could be uncovered to let in sunlight if needed. Violet would appear to be alone, running, while Vasilios waited in the shadows. When Constantine arrived, and he would arrive, believing he'd won, they'd spring the trap. "I'll need weapons," Violet said. "Real ones, not just kitchen knives." "I can provide those, but Violet, you need to understand if this goes wrong. If Constantine gets past me, you need to run. Don't try to fight him. Just run and get to safety." "Define safety. You're literally the only person who can protect me from vampires, and you'll be busy fighting. Where exactly am I supposed to run to?" She had a point. "There's a council enforcement station about 10 miles from the warehouse. If everything goes sideways, you go there. Tell them you're under Vasilios Draven's protection and that Constantine is performing blood magic. They'll take you into custody." Custody sounds an awful lot like prison. Protective custody. There's a difference. If you say so. That night, Vasilios made the calls that would set their plan in motion. He reached out to some of Constantine's known associates, letting slip that he'd lost track of Violet, that she'd run from the safe house in Salem. He made it believable, added just enough frustration and concern to sell the story. Word would get back to Constantine within hours. They had 2 days to prepare before the ritual's deadline, 2 days to get everything in position, to arm themselves and ready the trap. It wasn't enough time, not really, but it was what they had. Violet spent the time learning to handle the weapons Vasilios provided. A handgun loaded with wooden bullets, which would slow down a vampire but not kill them outright. A crossbow with silver-tipped bolts, deadly if she could land a heart shot, and various knives, silver-edged and weighted for throwing. She was a quick study, her steady hands and sharp focus serving her well. By the second day, she could hit a target consistently at 20 feet with both gun and crossbow. "You're good at this," Vasilios observed, watching her put 3 bolts through the center of a practice target. "I have steady hands, comes with the job." She lowered the crossbow and turned to him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If we survive this, when we survive this, what happens after? Do I just go back to my normal life and pretend vampires don't exist?" "That's up to you. Some humans who learn about our world choose to stay involved, work with vampire authorities, or become advocates for peaceful coexistence. Others prefer to return to normal life. Both choices are valid." "And you? What will you do?" "Continue hunting Constantine, assuming he survives our trap. Continue the work I've been doing for centuries, trying to keep balance between vampire and human worlds." Alone? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them had fully voiced. Vasilios met her eyes and saw the same awareness reflected there, the connection growing between them, the pull that went beyond mere protector and protected. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been alone for so long, it's difficult to imagine anything else." She set down the crossbow and crossed to him, moving with that same determination he'd come to recognize. "You saved my life. Multiple times now. And you've treated me like a partner, not just some helpless victim who needs managing. That means something to me." Violet. "I'm not saying I have everything figured out. This is all insane, and I'm still processing the fact that vampires are real, and apparently one of them wants to use me in a magical ritual. But I do know that I feel safer with you than I have with anyone else in my life, and I think maybe you feel something too, even if you're too stubborn or scared to admit it." She was right, of course. He did feel something, had felt it growing steadily since the moment she'd opened her door and faced him with nothing but courage and a kitchen knife. But feelings were dangerous, were the exact kind of vulnerability that had kept him alone for a century. "What I feel is irrelevant," he said quietly. "You're human. I'm vampire. We're from fundamentally different worlds. That's an excuse, not a reason. It's reality. I don't age, don't change. You'll grow old. We'll live a human lifespan. Any relationship between us has an expiration date built in. So does every relationship, vampire or human. Everyone dies eventually. That doesn't mean the time you have isn't worth it." He wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the distance that would protect them both from the complications that caring would bring. But looking at her, seeing the conviction in her eyes, he found his resolve crumbling. "After this is over," he said. "If we survive, we can discuss it. But right now, I need you to focus on staying alive." Deal. The night before the ritual, they moved to the warehouse. Vasilios had spent the previous day preparing it, setting up sightlines and hiding spots, rigging the windows so they could be uncovered quickly to let in sunlight. It wasn't perfect. There were a dozen ways Constantine could counter their advantages if he was clever, but it was the best they could do with limited time and resources. Violet took up her position in the center of the space, visible from most angles, looking vulnerable and alone. But she had weapons hidden on her person knives in her boots, the handgun tucked into the back of her jeans, and the crossbow nearby but out of immediate sight. She looked frightened, which wasn't hard to sell given the circumstances, but Vasilios could see the steel underneath. He hid himself in the shadows of the upper level, positioned where he could see the entire warehouse floor. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed, midnight approached, and still no sign of Constantine. Maybe he hadn't taken the bait. Maybe he'd seen through the trap and was planning something else. Maybe the warehouse door exploded inward. Constantine entered like a force of nature, his presence filling the space with dark energy. He looked exactly as Vasilios remembered, white hair flowing past his shoulders, silver eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, features that were beautiful and terrible in equal measure. He wore black modern clothes that somehow seemed anachronistic on his ancient frame. "Violet Newbury," he said, his voice carrying the accent of somewhere long ago and far away. "How kind of you to make this easy." Violet backed away, letting fear show on her face. "Stay away from me." "I'm afraid I can't do that. You have something I need, you see. Your blood, specifically. Your very useful, very rare genetic code that will allow me to walk in sunlight once more." "You're insane." "Perhaps, but I prefer to think of myself as ambitious." He moved toward her with predatory grace. "Where is Vasilios? I know he's here. I can sense him lurking in the shadows like the noble fool he's always been." "He's gone," Violet lied. "He gave up on me, decided I wasn't worth the trouble." Constantine laughed. "Now that I don't believe. Vasilios has many flaws, but abandoning someone under his protection isn't one of them. No, he's here, probably planning some heroic last stand." He raised his voice. "Come out, old friend. Let's settle this properly." Vasilios dropped from his hiding spot, landing between Constantine and Violet. "You're not taking her. I wondered how long you'd wait. Still playing the White Knight, I see." Constantine tilted his head, studying Vasilios with an expression that might have been pity. "You know you can't win this fight. I have 3 allies waiting outside, insurance against any treachery, and I'm stronger than you, always have been. Strength isn't everything." "No, but it helps." Constantine moved with impossible speed, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat, his hand wrapped around Vasilios's throat, lifting him off the ground. "I'm going to kill you, old friend, and then I'm going to drain that girl and complete my ritual, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." Vasilios smiled, despite the hand crushing his throat. "Now, Violet." She fired the crossbow. The silver bolt caught Constantine in the shoulder, and he roared with pain, dropping Vasilios. He spun toward Violet, rage contorting his features, and she fired again. This bolt went wide, but it bought Vasilios time to recover. He grabbed Constantine from behind, getting him in a chokehold that would have killed a human instantly. Constantine thrashed, stronger than Vasilios had anticipated, and they crashed into old machinery, breaking metal and wood. "The windows!" Vasilios shouted. Violet ran to the ropes he'd rigged earlier, pulling hard. Canvas fell away, revealing glass that had been covered for decades. Dawn was still hours away, but they had set up UV floodlights outside, high-intensity lamps that mimicked sunlight. Violet found the power switch and threw it. Harsh artificial light flooded the warehouse, and Constantine screamed. His skin began to smoke where the light touched it, blistering and burning. He threw Vasilios off and scrambled for the shadows, but Vasilios was ready. He grabbed Constantine and held him in the light, ignoring the way it burned his own skin. "Submit," Vasilios growled, "or we both burn." "You're bluffing. You won't sacrifice yourself for one human." "Won't I? I've lived 500 years, Constantine. I'm tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of your games. If dying here means ending you, I'll consider it a fair trade." He meant it. In that moment, holding his oldest enemy in artificial sunlight that seared his flesh, Vasilios realized he absolutely meant it. Violet was worth protecting, worth dying for, and if that made him a fool, then so be it. But Constantine must have seen the truth in his eyes, because he stopped struggling. All right, I submit. Just get me out of this light." Vasilios dragged him into the shadows and threw him to the ground. His own hands were badly burned, skin blackened and cracking, but vampire healing was already starting to work. It would take days to fully recover, but he'd survive. Constantine looked worse. Half his face was ruined, skin peeling away to reveal bone underneath. His hair had burned away on one side and one eye was clouded white. "You've won," he said through cracked lips. "What now? You kill me? Turn me over to the council?" "The council will decide your fate. I'm done with you." "And what about the girl? She knows about us now. That's a violation in itself." "She's under my protection. The council will accept that." "Will they? Or will you have to turn her to keep her safe?" Constantine's remaining eye gleamed with malice. "That would be poetic, wouldn't it? You, who despises turning humans, forced to make her one of us to preserve her life." Vasilios didn't respond. He bound Constantine with silver chains he'd prepared earlier, then called for help. Within an hour, council enforcers arrived, vampire authorities who dealt with those who broke their laws. They took Constantine into custody, promising a trial and likely execution for attempting blood magic. As they loaded Constantine into their vehicle, he called out to Vasilios one last time. "You haven't won anything, old friend. You've just complicated your life immeasurably. That human will be your downfall. Mark my words." Then he was gone, and Vasilios was alone with Violet in the warehouse. She approached him slowly, taking in his burned hands and exhausted posture. "You almost died. For me. I told you I'd keep you safe. You also said feelings were irrelevant." "I lied," she laughed, a sound of relief and joy and released tension. "So what happens now?" "Now we figure out what comes next. Together, if you'll have me. I'm a human. You're a 500-year-old vampire. This is complicated. Extremely. My mom is going to freak out. Understandably so. And I have no idea how to explain any of this to my coworkers. You don't have to explain. We'll say you were in witness protection or something equally mundane." She stepped closer until they were nearly touching. "You're sure about this? About me?" He thought about his century of isolation, his careful distance from emotional entanglement, his conviction that caring made you weak. And then he thought about Violet's courage, her humor, her steady presence that had become essential in just a few days. "I'm sure," he said. She kissed him then, standing on her toes to reach his lips, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Vasilios felt something beyond duty and determination. He felt hope. The weeks that followed were complicated, as they'd expected. The council debated what to do about Violet's knowledge of vampire society, but Vasilios's reputation and his capture of Constantine bought them leniency. She was granted protected status, allowed to keep her knowledge as long as she maintained secrecy. She returned to her job at the hospital, though she moved to a new apartment in a better neighborhood, one that Vasilios might have helped pay for, not that she needed to know the specifics. They fell into a routine of sorts, navigating the complications of a relationship between different species. He taught her about vampire culture, the complex politics and ancient laws that governed their world. She taught him about modern human life, dragging him to movies and restaurants and museums he'd avoided for decades. Her mother did indeed freak out when they finally told her about Vasilios, though she handled the vampire revelation better than expected. Her half-brother thought it was cool and asked entirely too many questions about blood drinking. Her co-workers assumed Vasilios was just an eccentric rich boyfriend who worked odd hours, and Violet let them believe it. 6 months after the incident with Constantine, on a spring evening when the city was coming alive with warmth and possibility, Vasilios found himself standing in Violet's new apartment watching her cook dinner. She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, humming along to music playing from her phone, completely at ease despite the vampire watching her every move. "You're staring again," she said without turning around. "I'm admiring. It's creepy." "I'm a vampire. Creepy comes with the territory." She turned and threw a dish towel at him, which he caught effortlessly. "You're such a dork. A 500-year-old dork. I prefer classically trained in romance." "Is that what we're calling it?" He crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against him, fitting perfectly against his chest despite their height difference. "I love you," he said quietly. "I don't think I've actually said those words yet." "You haven't. I was starting to wonder if vampires were capable of it." "We are. At least, I am. I love you, Violet Newbury. You're the most remarkable thing that's happened to me in 5 centuries. She turned in his arms, her eyes bright. "I love you too, even though you're a dramatic, overprotective vampire who broods too much and needs to learn how to use a smartphone properly." "I know how to use a smartphone. You still type with one finger." "It's precise." She kissed him, cutting off whatever protest he was about to make. When they finally broke apart, she said, "We should probably talk about the future at some point. The long-term logistics of this whole thing." "We will. But right now, I'm content to just be here, with you." "That's very zen for a vampire." "I've had a good teacher." They ate dinner together, her eating, him keeping her company, and talked about nothing important. Her shift at the hospital, a book she was reading, plans for a trip to Connecticut to visit her family. Normal things, human things, the kind of simple domesticity that Vasilios had never thought he'd experience. Later, as they sat on her couch watching a movie she'd been excited about and he found moderately entertaining, he felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or contentment. The knowledge that he'd found something worth protecting, worth changing his 500-year pattern of isolation for. Constantine had been wrong. Violet wasn't his downfall. She was his salvation. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the supernatural dramas that played out in its shadows. Vampires fed discreetly, the council maintained order, and the delicate balance between species held. And in a small apartment in a better neighborhood, a vampire and a human built something that shouldn't have worked but did, a relationship based on trust, respect, and love that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. Years would pass. Violet would age while Vasilios remained unchanging, and eventually they'd have to face the question of her mortality. But that was a problem for later, for some distant future where hard choices would need to be made. For now, they had the simple joy of being together, of having found each other against impossible odds. Violet fell asleep against his shoulder halfway through the movie, her breathing deep and even. Vasilios held her carefully, mindful of his strength, and thought about how strange and wonderful it was that a human woman with a kitchen knife and unshakable courage had changed everything. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, and he brushed a curl away from her face. "I've got you," he whispered. "Always." And for the first time in a century, Vasilios Draven looked toward the future and saw not just duty and endless struggle, but possibility. The possibility of happiness, of connection, of a life lived not in isolation, but in partnership with someone who saw him not as a monster or a protector, but simply as Vasilios. It was more than he'd ever thought he deserved. It was everything he'd never known he needed. The movie played on, unwatched. Outside, the night deepened, and the city pulsed with life. And inside, a vampire held a human woman while she slept, protecting her not out of duty or ancient codes, but out of love, the most powerful magic of all. This was their beginning, hard-won and precious. And though the future held uncertainties and challenges they couldn't yet imagine, in that moment, wrapped in each other's presence, they were exactly where they needed to be. Together. Finally, impossibly, wonderfully together. And that was enough.